Professor Johanna Gummerus, Professor in Marketing, and I now invite you to the podium.
Dear Rector, Dean of Research, fellow professors, colleagues, distinguished guests, Hanke Itar. My name is Johanna Gummerus, and as David just told you, I'm the newly appointed professor in marketing. In this inauguration speech, I will touch upon two topics. First, I will share with you some insights of my ongoing work. Second, I will conclude with some reflections about past and future research. Let's start with my ongoing work that focuses on the very topic I have given as the title of the speech: Understanding Vulnerable Consumers' Experiences in the Complex World. You might wonder, why is she talking about vulnerable consumers? Is this not a marginal group? And what do vulnerable consumers have to do with marketing in the first place? In fact, most of us are vulnerable at some stage of our life. We may, for example, face challenges in our relationships with others. We may experience professional or financial hardships, or we may struggle with our physical or mental health. On a global level, vulnerability is present in many people's lives. People live in poverty, or they are politically marginalized. They may need to flee their home countries due to persecution, war, famine, or natural catastrophes. Vulnerability is therefore not something that would characterize as a person, but rather it's a state that we experience, and it often results from circumstances we can't really help to deal with. And in marketing, we actually care about all kinds of consumers, and vulnerable consumers are, in the same way as any consumer group, worthy of our attention. So relevant questions include: how can we marketers, how can we address and serve vulnerable consumers better? What expectations and needs do these types of consumers have? And how can we alleviate the hardships that they experience? Besides its practical and societal importance, studying vulnerable consumers is aligned with the idea that universities and us as researchers are also in business-related areas responsible and have responsibility towards the society that we live in. Theoretically, vulnerable consumer focus falls within the domain of the relatively new strand of research called transformative service research. This strand aims at creating uplifting changes and improvements in the well-being of individuals, including consumers and employees, but also communities and ecosystems. So, in our recent study, we zoom in on one important and often neglected vulnerable consumer group, namely parents of children who have one type of neuropsychological disorder, namely autism spectrum disorder. For brevity's sake, I will refer to this spectrum as autism. The parents in our study are what we call secondary vulnerable consumers. Their vulnerable position is derived from their close ties to a person who is in a primary vulnerable position, that is their child or in some cases children who have autism. It is difficult to give exact numbers of how many children have autism, but the estimates are around 1 to 2% in most populations. Moreover, neuropsychiatric disorders, which in addition to autism also include ADHD and Tourette syndrome, are even more common. According to Autism Finland, some 10% of the population have some form of neuropsychiatric disorder, referring then to all three, autism, ADHD, and Tourette. Because those with autism and other disorders also have family members, be they parents, grandparents, siblings, and other relatives, but also employers, colleagues, and friends. The actual number of people touched by the disorders is far larger than the percentage would tell. One of the important aspects of autism is that being a spectrum, the challenges that the children and their parents face vary quite a lot. In fact, when I was discussing with Autism Finland, they reminded me of the often repeated phrase, when you have met a person with autism, you have done just that. You have met one person. We are never the diagnosis we have. And this also means that you cannot really assume that others on the spectrum would be the same. There are, however, 3 characteristics of autism that relate to abnormal functioning and that actually influence the family lives and also the lives of the children outside the home. These are reciprocal social interaction, communication, and restricted, stereotyped, often repetitive behavior. Other challenges may also exist which impact the parents, including sleeping and eating disturbances, temper tantrums, and often self-directed aggression. The needs of the children and their parents vary, but in general, I believe it is fair to say that the families have an elevated need for support. This brings us to the role of services, one of the traditionally central areas of research at Hanken. Our research group started asking, how do the parents of children with autism experience their lives? And how do the service systems support them so that the children receive the services that they need to thrive? Likewise important is how can the parents live their lives, work, and have a balanced family life also for the other siblings. This led us to explore the parents' experiences of the service systems. In our case, these systems that parents enlisted included daycare, education, health, child welfare, and social security systems. When we discussed with the parents, 2 important findings arose. First, the parents pointed out that the systems were disjointed and difficult to navigate. As the city of Helsinki describes on its webpage, the majority of people with an autism spectrum disorder will receive the services from other service providers than those specifically intended for people with an autism spectrum disorder. The parents felt that often they had to fight for the services as well as needed to shop around to find the right support. Both this study and our earlier study on family caregivers showed similar patterns. Caregivers such as parents use a lot of time and effort to secure services for their loved ones. They often put their social, financial, and even physical and emotional well-being on a second place. They felt that the service systems were complex and fragmented and longed for a one-door service point. In response to the difficulties to get the services that their child needed, the parents created strategies for navigating the systems. They purchased private services such as therapy to help their child, stopped social life to let the child rest, and searched for tips to support the child's emotional management and social relationships. They also had strategies to manage their home life, such as spending time in 2 locations so that the child had less sensory stimuli with fewer family members around them. In some extreme cases, the parents divorced because this allowed each of them more rest. This was done because the service system suffers from lack of resources and poor service integration and often failed to help the families. Hence, the parents became the relief valve for the non-functioning service systems. Second, the parents often felt they were stuck. Their life was, in a sense, frozen. They could not move forward because they could not trust that their child would become an independent adult who manages on his or her own. These experiences corresponded with what we call liminality, a term rooted in anthropology. This term refers to a state or process which is betwixt and between the normal, day-to-day, cultural and social states and processes. We have earlier seen often liminality as a natural part of a transition process like becoming an adult, where different rituals mark the transitioning from a child to an adult. In our case, for the parents, this liminality became permanent because there was no end at sight. Or in some cases, the child's future became polarized. As one parent told me, I can only see my child either in the gutter or in the stars. Nothing in between. Moreover, the parents could not envision a process that they could follow to make sure their child became independent. They felt alone. Therefore, the parents continued to fight for the resources the best they could. Despite their vulnerability, we could also see great strength in both the parents and the children. This research is still waiting for a final publication, so I hope these tasters have given you an idea of our work, but more reflections on the theoretical side have to wait. I will now move to the second part of my speech, which is shorter and which focuses on some key future projects and reflections with which I want to end. As you have now learned from my focus on vulnerable consumers, I do research that I believe matters. Together with my colleagues from Finland and abroad, I am involved in Nature Reach, where we explore the impact of virtual nature experiences on the well-being of vulnerable consumers. In another project, we explore older vulnerable consumers' experiences of living in residential care, with the hope that our insights will help service providers plan better services and improve older consumers' well-being. We also look into different ethical approaches that companies may take in their strategic thinking and look into how those impact profitability and innovativeness. All of these topics are relevant in a world where we wish to tackle big questions that also stand on the United Nations Development Goals, such as reduced inequality, good health and well-being, and responsible production and consumption. As a professor, I wish to continue on this path. Finally, I wish to conclude with a personal reflection. Becoming a professor means, for the most of us, hard work, perseverance, and a little bit of talent, but also luck, great colleagues, and organizational support. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all my wonderful colleagues at Hanken and in other universities in Finland and abroad, the organizations who have opened their doors, and the individuals who have generously shared their time with me. I also wish to thank my family and friends for support. With these words of warm thanks, I look forward to years ahead.